3 speakers lined up for today in their respective fields. Each speaker will share an example and their insights in 3 short, like 10 to 15-minute presentations, 3 little vignettes. Then we're going to break out into breakout sessions so that they can hear your input and answer any other questions. We'll all come back together for a group debrief afterwards. So with that, let me introduce our first speaker for today, Shane Gullett from Alexander Mann Solutions with Client Services Group. Shane's been with AMS for over about 8 years and in the talent acquisition field for almost 9 years. His passion and background is in sourcing technology and solutions for specialized and niche hiring categories. So with that, I will turn it over to Shane for our first presentation for today. Take it away, Shane.
Everybody hear me?
Gotcha.
Yep.
Yes, we can.
So first of all, I just want to say thank you for inviting me to your group. I am Shane Gullett from Alexander Mann Solutions. We are a global provider of recruitment process outsourcing services. We have about 4,500 people globally in 90 countries and speaking actually over 40 plus languages. And we do everything from working with large scale blue chip organizations to helping smaller organizations really materialize their talent acquisition departments. Tim, I'm going to say it's going to be a hard act to follow, but I think I want to lay away a little fears as well about AI and technology within this space and kind of set the scene as to where organizations are at with their digital transformation, some of the research that we've done in the background on how these tools are really developing, where they're at within our field, and kind of what that landscape looks like now and how it's developing into the future. So if we can jump into the next slide. To start with AI and technology, and I think some of these cartoons really maybe set the stage of some of the things that we've all been experienced, I think, within this COVID area as well, of how technology has been both an enabler, but maybe we're not all to the places where we really need to be. I really kind of set the scene with the middle cartoon of, are you guys ready to talk about digital transformation within the workspace? And maybe we can't see specific slides and how you've downloaded the plugin and maybe running into restrictions with cybersecurity within your space and maybe not having the most updated web browsers, or maybe having problems with data transfer and getting to the place where can you fax specific data over. So I want to say we've all been running into these types of situations, but digital technology within talent acquisition has really, I think, come to the forefront during this because we've all really needed to make changes to the way we integrate and work with and engage with talent since we're all been at home. And that could be with the way that we talk to candidates, the way that we move them throughout the entire recruitment process and get them onboarded. So with that, and with that in mind, we ran a piece of research kind of towards, candidly, before COVID, towards the end of 2019 and into 2020, to really understand globally where organizations were at with their digital transformations with talent acquisition, who was really had plans for it, who had things that were implemented, who were thinking about it, and who were talking about it. So if we can go into the next slide. What we found is everyone, and a lot of the data off the back of that, is digital technology has major benefits. It helps us within talent acquisition to improve retention rates, improve candidate experience, improve the performances of our team, but really on the flip side of that too is to really qualify and hire the right people that we're looking for within the types of roles that we have. But the research also showed that 1 in 4 companies still had no plans for digital transformation and didn't, in some instances, really know where to start. 32% of companies that we assessed didn't have the internal resources to really develop some of these solutions, and some were really struggling with the budget that they needed to implement these types of technologies. Going to the next slide. So the research methodology that we had for this is we analyzed 500 plus companies globally across a number of employee sizes and company sizes. 13% were small businesses, the 41% were really within that mid-market space, and then 46% were enterprise. And we looked across organizations within North America, within EMEA, and within APAC to really identify what those key trends were within digital transformation within talent acquisition, and talk to HR and talent acquisitions professionals at the director level and above. Next slide, please. So what we found was that 19% of companies within North America had not even started with digital transformation or implementing AI or these types of technologies into their business. 25% were just starting to really think about it, and that only about a little over 25% were either in the process or had implemented some sort of AI, machine learning, or natural language processing type of technology into their talent acquisition suites. I would say from a geography perspective and some of the things that Alexander Mann has seen with its global background is these type of technologies, Tim, this kind of goes back with Pepper and the robotics, is companies within, I would say, South Korea and Japan have been more of at the forefront of this, and more within the DACH region as well, or some of those organizations have really embraced and been at the forefront. I would say from my own personal experience, I've been in talent acquisition sourcing a lot within high-end technology groups, but also within investment banks. And they've been really early adopters within this space. But really over the last, I would say, 3 to 4 years, some of these technologies have started to get implemented into them, and they're starting now to trickle into different mid-size and smaller organizations within really the last couple of years, but even more now within the new workplace that we find ourselves in and how we need to communicate with really digital technology within this space. Can we move into slide 12? So some of the key drivers and terminology that we're seeing with AI is, to your point, the algorithms behind AI are to really help us do manual tasks that our recruitment functions, our administrators, or our sourcers would spend a lot of time doing. When I first started within talent acquisition, a lot of the tools that I was using were the Career Builders and the Monsters of the world to hire technology people for like Progressive Insurance in the state of Ohio. And we were still just getting into LinkedIn as a social networking tool. That's really evolved into what we do now. I would say a lot of what our teams and the teams that I've supported have spent a lot of time in past roles doing is writing really complex Boolean search strings.
Good, how are you?
Trying to define how we identify and really define the keywords and the requirements that we're looking for people within specific types of roles. I think there's somebody that's not on mute, but going into that, some of the tools that we've really implemented within this space help us to stack rank, identify, and build focus for the types of people that we're trying to find over time. So one of the tools that we're working with today and have started to pilot across organizations such as Barclays and Citibank have been tools that port into our ATSs and our CRMs, but also into a lot of the social networks and platforms that are out there to look across requirements on job descriptions, look across as I'm searching for positions and for people, the types of companies that I look for, the types of requirements, and to help build pipelines in the background. And the reason we are really gearing towards this is to get people into more value-added tasks rather than being stuck in check and chase types of requirements, being stuck in really doing a lot of heavy research. Within talent acquisition, it's much about bringing your brand to the table and having really in-depth conversations and value-add conversations with people and building that relationship. I think what we've noticed too over the last, say, 10 years is the standalone platforms that used to be in place, like applicant tracking systems really helped inform the processes that we would take everyone from the requisition raising through to offer management, but it didn't help really get into niche categories of engaging with passive and niche talent for really hard to fill roles. So there's been really an explosion and thousands of providers that really dive into that. And it's something that we've had to, as an organization, really invest in to go across all the different technologies that are out there in the marketplace to assess their peaks and troughs and which ones are really fit for purpose. So within Alexander Mann Solutions, we have a dedicated in-house resource team that is really just dedicated to understanding what the landscape looks like out in the marketplace so that we can come to the table with the best fit for purpose technologies for our customers. If we can move on to 13, I would say a lot of the landscape that is out there now, there are multiple technology providers out there for really every stage of the recruitment process, from the sourcing aspect really at the top of the funnel to selection and assessment. I would say in the volume space, a lot of what we've been seeing for volume hiring over the last couple of years using tools like the HireVue is video-based interviewing or chat-based interviewing, where there's programmatic and AI tools that can have conversations to really collect a lot of data points so that the recruiters can focus on really critical tasks of acting as talent advisors with their hiring managers or answering critical questions with candidates out in that space. The other tools that we've seen out there are really within business analytics and the data that we have to understand what our workforce plans need to look like in the future, but what our hiring trends have been as well. If we can move into 14, I think some of the key takeaways that we've really identified with businesses is start with people and not with technology. Really try to identify what are those problems that you're trying to overcome or trying to solve, rather than trying to plug in a piece of technology that you think might be fit for purpose. I think within the sourcing space, we've always really tried to, how do you get your people on the phone with candidates to have meaningful conversations? I would say when I first started, it was about how to really identify people. That hasn't been the challenge as much recently, but more towards identifying contact information, getting meaningful content about a company and their brand out to individuals, and then to have those assessment type of conversations. Our recommendations kind of within this phase 2 piece has really been to start small, of making sure that you're mapping these processes and then understanding these processes and then implementing almost in an agile scrum type of methodology of way software development teams would work to get incremental changes in ROI built into your businesses over time. I would say with that too is brand is a critical piece of all these types of technologies, whether it's chatbots that are trying to bring to life your organization while also assessing talent, but also the brand is, I think, the people aspect of what organizations need to really try to engage talent with, and something that should be a critical component and wrapping it around your entire talent acquisition function. And I think the other part to bring to the surface is that most companies are really still at an early stage right now. And there are tons of data points out there, whether you're searching on Google or other platforms, as to what might be fit for purpose. It's not a bad place to say, I'm not sure, to raise your hand and to ask for help, to say, here are some of the things that I'm running into. What are the recommendations and what can really to help me? I think the other piece that we've really noticed from our research is that the innovation within the technology space for talent acquisition is the highest that it's ever been, but adoption still varies. Adoption still varies because there's reasons that we need to be able to get these technologies in so that we can communicate in better places, but maybe we're still trying to identify what are the key places to get those in. So I mean, those are some of the places that we were really trying to help organizations build an identity and the employer value proposition to get the right technologies in place to still communicate with their candidates. Can we move over to 15? So this is my thank you slide. I think once we get into the breakout group, I'll be able to answer questions around specific technologies that are in assessment within sourcing and identification. Maybe talk a little bit more about bias within sourcing and within diversity inclusion, and how those technologies are really important to the way that we interact with our clients. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you very much. That was some great information. Look forward to the breakout. Next up, next speaker is Michael Mitchell. Mike's from Upshot Health. Mike has 22 years working in healthcare. He's led clinical and business teams in the medical, pharmacy, and health analytics field. He's held various executive positions, including digital therapeutics and population health management. It's my pleasure to welcome Mike Mitchell.
Good morning, everybody. Hit me up if you can't hear me. I'm on the computer's microphone, but everyone else sounds good. So, hey, Diane, I wonder if you could go into the slide mode a little bit. Yeah, no, I think we're good. I think you're fine. Yeah, to go back to the first slide for a second, this is game-changing health analytics. The health analytics I'm going to be going through today in a very short order. It's mainly for employers that are self-funded. So these are organizations that have taken on some risk and they're really paying the expense for their own claims, and they're looking at ways in which they can change the dynamic. I've been in healthcare and analytics field, as Diane said, for a good number of years. I started as underwriting. That's when I was first introduced to health data analytics and realized, oh my gosh, I'm a data geek. Didn't know I was a data geek. Underwriting is kind of a mix of art and science, and I was definitely more on the artistic side. But this is some of that technology has now been adopted by Upshot Health and a number of other organizations to help employer groups really get ahead on the predictive side of their healthcare costs. Thanks, Diane. Just go to head number 2. We're looking at some of the cost drivers with any health plan, and I've got probably, if you look at from diabetes right down to lack of population preventative medicine maintenance, this really accounts for 80 to 90% of costs with any specific employer group. And what we're doing now is we're looking at these top disease states. Every one of these disease states in the clinical world, in the clinical research world, they have standards of care attached. So they have standards of care attached for diabetes and congestive heart failure. And then within that disease state, there's also standards of care based upon someone's demographic profile. And are you in your 40s, in your 50s, or your 60s? Are you a male? Are you a female? What social determinants of health might you be struggling with or challenged with? So it's getting more and more granular in terms of what is the best way to manage the population, not only by the disease states going on within the population, but what's the personnel makeup? What's the demographic profile of the group in question? And they've gotten more and more specific, and the artificial intelligence and the predictive modeling around these disease states have gotten more specific as well. As the standards of care increase, the predictions get more specific and get more accurate. So let's move on. So in every population, folks, you're finding this 80-20 rule or this 75-25 rule. Everyone knows that typically there's a small percentage of your population that's really driving the majority of your costs. And your data is being looked at from a health insurance or from a health underwriting, from a rate assessment standpoint. It's being looked at in this model. And underwriters typically concentrate on what's the top 20% of members that are driving the 80% of the costs. And how are they trending? Do we think the costs in 2020 are going to continue into 2021? What's the average age of the group? So they do very high level aggregate statistics they apply on your group, and then they set your rates for the upcoming year, saying, yeah, we think that these costs are going to continue into the new year, or there were some costs that occurred in 2021 that we hadn't predicted. So you're going to have a rate increase in 2021 because your rate trend in 2020 was higher than expected. The morbidity rate was higher. The mortality rate was higher. I should say morbidity rate alone. And that's really a simplified way in which the analytics that are used within the health insurance world are being used now in a very high level, 30,000 foot aggregate view. Go right ahead. So the value of AI-driven predictive technology, we're not only looking at, everyone can tell you, here's what happened in your plan last year, here are the good things and the bad things, but the value of artificial intelligence-driven predictive modeling, we're looking to say, yes, we know that what has happened, there needs to be some better management of that population, but what's the opportunity for folks that might be low risk or moderate risk that might be moving into a higher risk category? What is the opportunity of what has been their compliance with clinical directives in the past? And are they predicted to continue to seek care or not seek care? And are those gaps in care going to cause unpredicted or a cost event or and healthcare encounters that's not readily available or evident in the data? So the opportunity to project likely events. We look at group forecast down to that member level. How is Mike Mitchell trending versus other members of the organization? It provides really actionable information to our team. So not only are we a health analytics team, but we also have clinical folks. We have nurse practitioners, medical directors, registered dietitians, behavioral health specialists, virtual care providers that we're matching up with members of our organization based upon what the data is telling us. So it does provide an opportunity to give us the right action at the right time. And it also empowers HR professionals to really put some strategic plans in place with the greatest impact. There's a lot of wellness companies out there that we think they do a great job. Some of them are portal oriented. Our mantra has been that a portal never really changed anyone's life, but having that face-to-face interaction. So we use this information for clinical interventions right at the worksite. That's what we do. But the first thing we look at an employer group is we take on 24 months of claims data, and we simply look at what was the current cost, the actual cost, and what is the technology telling of us where the costs are going to go, right down to that member level. So that bar graph that you see on the right is the first thing we do when we start working with an organization is what's going on in that organization and where are there's cost trending. So it's a very granular, specific, targeted view of cost increases or decreases depending on how that group is trending. Thanks, you can move on. So the value to your plan, why would you consider even bringing in an AI-powered predictive modeling engine? First, let me tell you that your data is already being looked at from a rate build methodology from the underwriting team, right? And that data is being used in sort of a pejorative fashion. It's being used of how can we set the rates for this employer group to ensure that we're going to make money, that we're covering our expense, our medical loss ratios are really where they need to be. Optum, for example, which is a division of a multi-billion-dollar United Healthcare, they're a data-driven organization. We're using that same data, but specifically for the employer's benefit. And I will let you know that we are part of a much larger data sharing organization. We have about 1.2 million members that are in our data aggregation plan. So the value to your plan, why would you even consider implementing something like this? The system will aggregate and leverage the data to become actionable for our clinical teams. We're going to provide you, a client, a real clear picture of where to focus your resources, how to spend those healthcare dollars in the most efficient way. We're also finding the at-risk employees before they reach a crisis. We want to track those who are healthy today, but the predictions, the AI are saying they're likely to become sick tomorrow based upon these predictive modeling algorithms. So let's get around some preventative care and some changing the trajectory of folks that are low risk or moderate risk, but we're projecting them to move into a higher risk category. And essentially provides the ability to plan for the future, whether that be from a budgetary standpoint, from a health resource standpoint, or what have you. So that's the 5 bullet points that really track why our employer groups bringing in a predictive modeling AI-powered program into their health plan management program. So we're taking a proactive approach. I'm going to run through these next couple slides, guys, because I think it's fairly evident. But what we're doing for our employer groups is saying, here's how your plan is running financially now. Here's where expected to run. This is what's driving the large, everyone knows the large claim costs. The underwriters know, everyone knows what's going on, what's driving those costs and why the rate increases are coming out. So we know that. We want to determine what are the gaps in care, what standards of care are missing in those high cost claimants that we can close those gaps in care and minimize their risk. What claimants are most likely to drive future healthcare claims, as I noted. healthy today, predicted to become ill tomorrow, and how successful are health management vendors in preventing disease and diagnosing it in the earliest of stages. So one of the things, the way we get the data is we get the data from insurance companies. You would sign off on a data release letter. We would get that data. The data stays with us. None of that data is shared with the employer group, but we do give you those outcomes. Here's what's going on. Here's our recommendations for a health improvement strategy within your group. And then we also ask the insurance company, can you show us the folks that are actually in a case management or a care management mode right now? And typically, folks, we see, the top 2 or 3 or 4% of the population that's engaged in any type of health improvement strategy. I think the biggest difference we do versus the health insurance carriers or the care management firms is we cast with a much wider net downstream to bring in more of the folks that are in need of some health improvement and some strategies. Okay. So how does it work? We take in medical claims, we take in RX claims, we take in member eligibility, we'll take in optional data like lab results or electronic medical record or even biometric screening data. We'll take 24 months of data. It goes through 52 different forecasting tools, and it integrates that artificial intelligence, that integration with those forecasting tools. And then it applies member values, member risk values to each member. So every member is placed in 1 of 5 risk categories. The engine itself that we're involved in and that 1.2 million other employees are being analyzed on is called the MITCH engine. And that stands for Multiple Intelligent Teaching Computer Heuristics. So it's been around for a while. It's just getting more and more profound, more and more elevated in its technology. I'll tell you, when I first started in healthcare, the topic of the day, the debate was the day on Hillary Care. And at that point, I was an underwriter using very, to this day, kind of first generation tools. But the tools that are being used now are the tools that we're using now are much more AI oriented, and they're not just the tools back then were called rules-based engines, where certain things had to hit a certain rule, or it was used. It was called high cost trigger diagnosis. We have a high cost claim in here. We have a high cost person, and we need to start managing them. But now the predictive part of it is getting much more profound. Go right ahead. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the predictive tools that are used in today's. This is, it's 52 different computer heuristics. I've broken out about 11 of them here for you. Some of the things are, well, we can look at fuzzy logic. Something is not 100% right or 100% wrong. It could be 80% right or 80% wrong. There's a program there called neural networks. It's very similar to how the biological brain works. And it basically is connecting the dots. So it's looking at these loosely paired sort of neuron or data nodes or data points, and it's connecting the dots to say, aha, I've seen this before. This is the eventual outcome. Nonlinear regression, that's regression analysis, regression to the norm. What's the likelihood of someone's ailment or someone's disease getting better over time through that regression? And those are some of the things we use. Cohona networks. Genetic algorithms are getting more and more prevalent. The study of genomics and getting personalized precision medicine based upon someone's genomic makeup. So that is what we're doing now, and how the evolution and how these predictive analytic tools have progressed and migrated into a really AI environment. Go right ahead. So these are the AI modeling relationships. This gives you a schematic sort of visual of what's going on. Another topic or another title for this slide could have been, and you're so predictable. So what the systems are doing and what these analytic engines are doing is looking for patterns. That's what AI is. It's a learning, teaching, a learning computer heuristic, and it's looking for patterns. So if I'm a 55-year-old male, living in Cleveland, Ohio, and I've got a heart condition, and I'm not on an ACE inhibitor, and I have unregulated or unmanaged diabetes, and I have complications from COPD. The system is making these connections to say, aha, I've seen this before, and the likelihood of this event occurring is very high. So this is probability scaling. It's looking at individuals. It's looking at their disease states, making sure that they're getting the standards of care that they require. And if they're not, if there's gaps in care occurring, it's predicting down to that level of there's likely going to be an event in the next 6 months, and the inpatient stay is going to be $55,600, between $55,600 and $67,300. So it's looking at these probabilities, and it's also saying there is going to be an event. Let's get ahead of that event. Let's intervene and have some interventional medicine, apply some interventional medicine with our clinical team, do some education, do some awareness with those employees, and get them into a more managed condition or a more managed environment. So that's what You're So Predictable is all about. This is just another look at, as that data comes in, all members are risk stratified into 1 to 5 risk categories, and the clinical management programs help the members move toward greater health. It provides clinical pathway direction for all the risk groups. So there's a lot of education in this, right? If this data is being used by our clinical team and our data analysts, then that information and that education has to be taken down to that member level. And a real life conversation needs to take place about, hey, you're at a crossroads. This is where you're trending. This is where we'd like you to trend. These are the opportunities for improvement. So the employer group does not see any of this data. All that data is between the clinician and that specific employee, if you're taking on any type of virtual care or on-site health. So the goal is to not only manage costs, but to improve the health of these individuals at the same time. But this is opaque to the employer group. So the level of privacy and confidentiality is the same as you should expect with any other healthcare provider. But it's the information that's being given to the employee or to the member is much more precise in terms of how we'd like to improve, and then we put the programs in place to get them onto a better track. This gives you a sense of how accurate the data is. So the Society of Healthcare Actuaries managed and looked at a lot of different predictive modeling engines in the healthcare world, and we looked at what is the accuracy of the data versus the predictions, and how well did they plot. So the outcomes were already known through the Society of Health Actuaries. So those data plots or those data nodes were giving to these predictive modeling engines, and then our engine was plotted against the actual outcomes, and you can see that the accuracy was pretty significant. Those R-squared values that we consider in underwriting to be the barometer of accuracy has always scaled higher than the 3 or 4 other AI health engines that are out there. So the Society of Healthcare Actuaries actually stopped doing this study after 3 or 4 years, where the tool that we were using consistently scored higher than some of the other second generation or first generation tools that are out there. So it is very accurate in its predictions. This is a very simple chart, folks, but what we look at along the spectrum of any population is from wellness right up to disease progression. And those wellness tools are terrific. Weight management, cholesterol management, nutrition, diet, we have those as well. But we also have those programs for the chronic disease folks as well. But our population health monitor looks for those future shocks, quote unquote, those future events. And how can we deter or change the trajectory of folks, where the statistic is the highest cost paid in the final years of life, 75% of chronic costs are avoidable. And let me repeat that, 75% of chronic care costs are avoidable due to lifestyle modification. So we want to get them along this spectrum before they move into a comorbidity or a high risk chronic condition. This is a dashboard that our members use. I just wanted to give you a look at it. So the first thing our clinicians will look at is who are the high risk members, who are the movers, who are those moving from high risk to from low risk to high risk. What are the guideline gaps, those standards of care that I talked about by disease state? How many folks have gaps in care? So if you're a diabetic, have you had your A1C checked? Have you had a foot exam and an eye exam? Have you had a cholesterol checked? If those things aren't identified and managed, those can lead to higher cost claim events in the future. We have a lot of this data, employer groups looking at a reduction in claim costs over years. We've been able to identify down to the member level, here are the folks that were projected to move into this cost structure and this risk tier, and this is where they actually ended up. So we provide that aggregate data to the employer group, and then we actually have obviously a pretty engaging population health management platform with a member that we can communicate with, check their progress towards goal. How are they doing? Do we need to modify our health improvement strategy for that particular member based upon life events or things that didn't work, things along those lines. Go right ahead. Here's that Society of Actuaries study that I talked about. It was done in 2015, 16, and 17. Our program is called the Health Risk Monitor Program. Here are essentially the other players, the competitors that are out there. The problem with these other competitors, you need to have 40 or 50,000 members under management in order to get access to the Milliman programs or the Verisk or the John Hopkins programs or the SEIO Health Analytics. They're typically working with large health insurance organizations, or they're working with care management organizations or HMOs. Our program is specifically designed for the mid-level or for the moderately sized employer. You're part of a larger association, if you will, a larger collaboration. So our data analytics, we're taking it right down to the member level. You don't have to have 30,000 employees in order to access this data. Our smallest client is a 100 life municipality. So we're taking this, we're democratizing the data, we're taking the data down to the employer group level and making it actionable and really bringing some of these analytics that have been the domain of the health insurance industry down to the employer group level. And I think that's it. Is that correct? Yeah, I'm all done. So hopefully that was a good introduction to let you know how AI is moving into health plan management, and looking forward to any of the questions that might come out of the breakout session. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mike. Very informative again. That moves us to our third mini presentation for today. Joining us is Jake Corey from Omnigo Software. Jake is, he's held several software engineering positions in the financial services industry, bachelor's degree in computer science. So he's a techie among us. Jake, take it away.
Thank you very much, Diane. And welcome, everybody. I want to thank you all for taking the time out to join us today. And I specifically want to thank HRLG for giving me the opportunity to speak on this topic, which I believe is a very important one. And that topic today is, of course, artificial intelligence, related technologies like facial recognition, and how they can be responsibly used to ensure a safer workplace. A lot of these technologies are already in use in the field right now, actually. But there are some real concerns out there about these technologies, real concerns that I think should be addressed, as we're beginning to understand and starting to adopt these technologies. But before we get to those concerns, I'll just talk a little bit about some of the real benefits that do exist with using AI and specifically facial recognition in order to aid security in the workplace. And so the first part of that is physical security and how facial recognition can really benefit that. So as I'm sure many of you already know, a lot of organizations and companies are actually already beginning to use facial recognition. They're using it on their existing cameras. Sometimes they're adding new cameras and more for that setup. But they're really using it so that they can identify individuals that maybe are high risk and whose behavior might put other people in peril. And obviously identifying these individuals has been the job of security staff for quite a long time. But what we're seeing at Omnigo is that facial recognition is really improving their ability to do that consistently and effectively. And security staff, they usually have an existing list somewhere. Maybe it's on an Excel spreadsheet, or maybe it's in some sort of software system. But they usually have an existing list of high-risk individuals that may be banned or watched on a property. And these individuals might include former employees that security maybe considers a risk, or it could include bad actors who have been involved in security incidents in the past. And with facial recognition, many of these individuals can be instantaneously identified as they attempt to access and enter a property. And that means that the security staff can be instantly notified so that they can act quickly to try to stop these incidents before they even happen. So that really goes to making their job more proactive than retroactive. And if we can go to the next slide here, I want to touch on how face rec can be used to help mitigate COVID. And that's actually already begun to happen. So AI and face rec, they're already being used to help reduce the risk of the transmission of COVID in the workplace. And that's obviously been a huge part of workplace safety recently, ever since this whole thing started. And you've probably all had some sort of experience when it comes to COVID screenings as you've gone to establishments in the last 9 or 10 months. It usually involves some sort of temperature check to see if you may have an elevated fever, which might be symptomatic of COVID. And it also might involve some questions around possible exposure. You know, have you been around anybody recently that has COVID? Have you traveled across state lines? Questions like that. And what we're seeing is that these screenings are a really important part of many organizations' return to work strategies. Many organizations are implementing these COVID screening strategies differently, but they all play a very important role as companies try to figure out how can we return to work and do so safely. And so what we commonly see at Omnigo is that front desk staff and security staff are usually tasked with the job of conducting these COVID screenings. And the downside of this approach is that it costs significant resources because the personnel that are conducting these screenings are usually taken away from the usual work that they do. So that may result in more hours that they may have to work, but it could also result in, you know, additional personnel being required. And the other downside to this is the personnel that are actually carrying out those screenings are at risk of transmission as they go to do a temperature check. Usually that's done with a handheld thermometer. And in order to do that, you have to get pretty close, definitely within 6 feet.
Jake, we just lost your audio. Hey, Jake.
So they use a thermal infrared camera. I'm sorry, my mic changed there, but they may be using a thermal infrared camera as well as facial recognition on these kiosks. And that really helps the kiosks identify individuals that have elevated temperatures, which again, they may have COVID. And so they may want to, quarantine for a certain amount of time. The kiosk can help identify individuals without masks. So the AI can actually, while it's doing a scan on the face, determine if that individual is wearing a mask or not. And if there's a policy at the workplace that a mask is required, it can inform them that they must wear one to be on the property. And it can also help identify individuals who need to be in a quarantine period. So maybe you had somebody come in the last week and they got checked and had a temperature and they were instructed to quarantine for a period of say 2 or 3 weeks. But some people try their luck and come in like a week later because they're feeling better and they wouldn't exhibit a temperature in that instance. And in that case, a lot of these kiosks, they only understand the information that's real time around, what's the temperature right now. So without facial recognition, it wouldn't have a way of telling, hey, this individual actually is in a quarantine period. So they're temporarily non-permissible from their premises. And if we can go to the next slide here, I just want to touch on the example of how Intel is using facial recognition in the workplace already. So in early 2020, the Oregonian reported that Intel had begun to use face rec technology at 2 of its Oregon campuses in order to identify high-risk individuals that might pose a threat to the company or its 20,000 plus employees there. They've actually rolled out this technology to other US sites outside of Oregon and definitely have announced plans to continue rolling this out over time. And Intel has faced a little bit of public scrutiny from groups such as the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is a group that advocates for online privacy. And part of the foundation for this scrutiny is that Intel hasn't exactly made it clear how they plan to secure this biometric information that they'll be capturing. The biometric information being the type of information that's stored after a facial recognition scan is complete, and it's information about people that can be used to identify them just based on their face. And so if this data is compromised or lost in something like a hack or a data breach, if information such as credit cards, emails, passwords, if stuff like that is lost, it can be replaced. But if it's biometric information that's captured, that obviously can't be replaced as easily. And so that's why it's so important to securely and properly safeguard this information with these systems. So because of this, many groups have argued that Intel should be ensuring that they're only collecting this type of data with affirmative consent from its employees and visitors so that they would have the option to opt out of this system. And if we can go to the last slide here, The last thing I want to touch on is responsible use of these technologies. So as HR leaders in the field, you all have a unique opportunity to ensure that these new tools are being used in a way that is mindful and respectful of the privacy of both employees and visitors. And the way you can do that is to keep two things in mind. The first one is this: are we doing all that we can to securely store this data? And I understand that many of you may not be the ones that are choosing the exact encryption algorithms that are being used to store it, or doing the footwork of configuring and setting up these systems. But what you can do is be an advocate on behalf of your employees to ensure that their security of their information is made a priority. And so the other consideration would be, do our employees and visitors have the option to opt out of this system if they choose to do so? It's not always going to be feasible to make this option available. That could be because the scale of the project is so large. It could be the way that that system is implemented, or it could be some other requirements. But if that option is possible, it should be made available to employees and visitors. And even if it's not, it's important to be transparent about how that information is going to be securely stored and handled by the organization. Making these types of considerations, I feel, is going to really strengthen the trust that exists between employees and organizations, and it will demonstrate to them that their privacy is in mind. So while there's undoubtedly going to be concerns that need to be addressed as these new technologies are adopted, they absolutely have real and significant benefits to offer. And the last thing I'll say is this: regardless of whether or not they'll be used responsibly, these AI tools are almost inevitable as we work to secure our workplaces in the future. So it's important to use them responsibly. And with that, I want to thank you all for letting me speak on this.
Jake, very well said. Wow, we are right on schedule. Thank you so much to our three presenters. A ton of information. I'm looking forward to getting to the breakouts, which is what's up next in our program today. So again, we'll have a breakout session, 3 different breakouts with each one of our speakers for today. The way it's going to work is you'll be sent to the breakout you selected when you registered for the event, or HR leadership group selected for you. So you automatically put into a breakout with one of our 3 speakers today, and they want to hear your input and insights from what they shared today and answer any questions you might have. For discussion, we have a prime the pump type question, food for thought for your breakouts. What should we be thinking about and doing to leverage the positive benefits and avoid the pitfalls? When you get into your breakouts, please select someone to summarize 3 key takeaways from the session that we can share in the group debrief afterwards. As we get started, please start your video and unmute yourself. And we will see you back here in 10 minutes. Stephanie, take it away.
Okay, I'm going to open up the rooms. Hey there. Gary, you having trouble? Okay, I hope everybody went to where they need to go.